Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another exciting episode of Not Too Comic Book. For today's video, I'm going to talk about this week's episodes of iZombie, The Flash, as well as Arrow. So, let's start off with iZombie. Some pretty big things happened in this episode of iZombie. Well, for one, we find out that Drake, Liv's boyfriend, is actually an undercover cop, undercover for particularly Mr. Boss, but he doesn't rat out Blaine, which I find very interesting. Like he's telling on stuff about Mr. Boss, but he's not telling anything about Blaine because his, I guess you call him his handler or his superior officer is like, yo, like do you know who this competitor is? And Drake's like, no, I don't know who it is. Even though he knows it's Blaine, which to me, I can only assume the reason why he's not bringing Blaine up in the conversation is because of the whole zombie thing. Just because it'd lead to Blaine's operation, and that might lead back to him being a zombie, as well as it might throw Liv in the middle of all of this. Because that's my only reason for thinking like why he wouldn't throw Blaine under the bus, but. And maybe also because in it itself, maybe he feels like if it ties into Blaine, maybe in some shape or form, it'll tie back to Liv, which he wants to keep Liv out of all of this, hence why he hasn't even told her about what he's doing. I mean, because it feels like out of anybody, you'd be able to tell Liv that you're an undercover cop. She is a medical examiner, son. But that's just how that is. A very interesting thing in this week's case to me, just throwing it in there, as I found very interesting was the fact is that the killer ended up being the victim's daughter, and basically she had kind of talked her boyfriend into killing her mom, and then at the very near the end of the episode, her boyfriend wanted to finally confess. He's like, "No, what? It was me and." My girlfriend, it was kind of her idea, so I might have been the one to push the AC, which granted that was like really brutal. I mean, because she's just all la-di-da-da, so positive outside, smiling, and bam, she gets her head caved in by an AC. That was pretty brutal. I already knew it was coming because I'd seen the previous for it, but still, that was pretty intense. But anyway, he admits like, no, she's the one that came up with this idea. I may have killed her mom, but it was 100% her idea. All for the sole purpose of getting money. So, but then at the police station, like the cop that's supposed to be watching him got distracted because another guy who was handcuffed was kind of acting out of control, so he had to help another officer. She snuck in, she talked to him. We don't know what exactly she said to him, but the moment she finished saying what she needed to say, she kissed him, and he was like, you know what, I want to take it back. It was 100% me. She had nothing to do with this. I lied. And it's like, wow. That is one cold-hearted, manipulative SOB. I mean, and she just looks so unapologetic about it. It's not simple like, oh, I did a bad thing and I regret it. It's like, no, she showed zero remorse. Because in the episode, we see her I think she sells the business to her mom's ex-boyfriend as well as her mom's competitor when it comes to like these coffee shops or whatever. Sells the shop to him and just gets in a taxi and bounces. What else happened this episode? Oh yeah, and I totally forgot about the fact is that at the beginning of the episode we have, at the end of last episode and / at the beginning of this episode, we have Ravi, with the newfound tainted utopium they found in the dead guys' bodies. Most of the packs were useless because they had been dissolved by like the stomach acid, but there was some utopium that was still useful, and Ravi tried recreating cure, particularly the cure he had used on Major and Blaine that had temporarily stopped them from being zombies, but obviously had a temporary effect, as we know, and so they were like, all right, we're going to try it, he's going to try it on his rat, obviously, to make sure everything's safe first. And he ends up using it on rat, and sadly, the rat, it's like fully zombified. So that means this cure isn't going to work. Then we also have, in this episode, a pretty big thing happen where Mr. Boss basically figures out that Blaine is the one that's selling him out to the DA, because he already knew a lot of his boys were getting arrested recently, and now, after one of his henchmen showed up and said like, "Oh, you know who Blaine is, right? He's Chinatown," which is a very interesting nickname. You find out the story of why Blaine is nicknamed Chinatown. And do correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think that has ever been brought up prior to now. But whatever. So Mr. Boss is like, okay, he's the one that's selling me out. Ends up kidnapping Blaine, and then we have Blaine being brought to a shallow grave. Him and Mr. Boss are talking a little bit back and forth, and then finally, Mr. Boss has his men just like slice Blaine's throat open, leaves him for dead, buries him in the grave, and walks away. Like this was in the middle of the night, and like the next day, Blaine rises up from the dead. He's a freaking zombie again. Which at the same time, before they even reveal that to you, they also have like the woman here that works at the funeral home. He had slept with her previously. And let me note that I don't know how I feel about the fact is that like where they were having sex was a casket. Because, I mean, when you see like him playing the piano, it's her laying in that little kind of double wide casket. So it's like, so they had sex in a casket. I get you're in a funeral home, but really, that's your... Okay, you do you, I guess. But this is very interesting because this means, now Blaine is back in the zombie world, and I'm very curious to see what the first thing he is going to do with his newfound zombieism. And what this actually means for Major, because that means that Blaine's, or like maybe dying kind of kicked his zombieism into overdrive, or maybe it was just that time. So I'm curious to see, like, if something happens, if Major ends up, like, being in a position where he dies, would that mean he turns into a zombie? Or is it just happened to be Blaine's time for whatever reason? Granted, he did get the cure before, so it would make sense that he would turn into a zombie first before Major, but I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see. And since I'm talking about Major, I cannot believe I'm totally forgetting about the other big thing that went down this episode, where we have, Major kind of like... just this whole thought process of turning into a zombie, or kind of freaking him out, especially now that he knows that the cure's not like even possibility, even more, even if it was a temporary cure, it was still a huge hope for him, and seeing that it didn't work on a rat just dashes his hope. So he went over to Liv's place, and he was going to tell her the truth, when all of a sudden her roommate shows up, and then Liv makes the introduction between the two, and Major, being who he is, just like, realizes that she's the same lady from Max Rager, because he had no idea that she was Liv's roommate, because when you actually think about it and look back, they never actually met face to face. He knew that she was aware of Olivia, but he didn't know she was this close to Olivia. So this stops Major from telling her the truth. So Major is like, you know what, I'm gonna go. Just don't worry about it. I'm just gonna go. And so he leaves, and as he's leaving, he's like, he says, "Bye, Rita." And in that moment, it clicks in Liv's brain, because Liv had been previously jealous because of previously that brain she had about the overly jealous lady. And she went through his phone and got in contact with Rita, because Rita sent her sent her as Major the picture of her in that silky night dress, and it just all clicked in her brain. Liv went into a room, found the little nightgown she was wearing in that picture, and then confronted her and punched her hard as hell in the face, and just made her start bleeding. She's just looking like, what are you? And then Liv is like, I know who you are. You got with Major, and you got some sick enjoyment out of all this, didn't you? Because you were trying to hook up with Major, and you already knew how this whole thing with Major's been difficult for me. You just got some sick kick out of it. She's like, well, pack your crap, you're getting out of here. Which is like, oh! But sadly, Liv is still completely in the dark, She's like, yes, she's got that crazy, mean-spirited redhead out of her place, but it still is not going... She still doesn't know the entire truth. She only knows part of the truth, So, I mean, makes you wonder, will Major ever really tell her everything? I mean, I feel like, it's all going to come to the, surface, obviously, but I feel like maybe... I don't know if it's going to be Major's going to be the one to tell her the truth, or will she have to find out for herself. So, I'm quite interested to see where that goes, so... Now let's move on to this week's episode of The Flash. We pick up right where last week's episode left off, with Jay getting like an arm through his chest and being pulled through the breach, and this just kills Caitlin. And just Barry's like, yo, we gotta open it up, and Wells is like, nope, the breaches are closed, there's no way of opening them back up. Like, the devices they built were made so that there was no way of opening breaches to Earth 2. There's no way of getting back there. There's no way for Zoom to get here, but there's no way for us to get there to Zoom. And, it sucks on every part, because to Barry, what just happened to Jay is one reason. But two is like, what that means? That means all of Earth 2 is victim to Zoom. He was meant to stop Zoom, but he couldn't, and he can't now. And Wells tells both Cisco and Barry that they shouldn't talk about anything that they've experienced in Earth 2, just because telling the people in their lives about what they experienced over there, telling them about their Earth 2 doppelgangers, might influence them in some shape or form. So it's best not to tell them. I mean, it's kind of, he's like, it's also like irrelevant to tell them, because those people over there have lived completely different lives than the people here. So why even bother? So a little time has passed. I don't think they tell you specifically how much time has passed, but it's like, oh yeah, time has passed. Barry, his mind is still weighed about everything he experienced in Earth 2, then the whole situation with Jay, and it's just, I don't know, like he's running, he's just looking for a metahuman. He needs something to keep himself distracted from dealing with all that pain and all the stuff that's rushing through his head. And then at the same time, you also have Caitlin just reeling with, what happened to Jay. I mean, this is like, her first love since Ronnie. And to lose him like this, it's too much for her. She's kind of shut herself down. I mean, granted, you can't blame her. I mean, first Ronnie at the beginning of the season, now Jay, just when she was about to start loving again, when she actually did start loving again, just to have him taken away from her like that, it sucks. But even with all that happening, life still goes on. And we have Diggle and Lila showing up to warn Barry about King Shark, who had apparently, last time Barry had seen him, when Wells dealt with him, he didn't die. Argus showed up and took him into custody just so they could understand him a little bit better. So he ended up breaking out of Argus, and he decided, he was going to come after Barry. Because remember, Zoom sent him there with one purpose, and that was to kill Barry. So his mission is still kill Barry, because he knows that if he kills Barry, he can go back home. So that's kind of a awesome thing in itself, because that leads to like a very amazing showdown nearing the end of the episode, where you have Barry dashing across the water, and you have King Shark just like swimming after him. It's pretty epic. And then he starts running around in a circle and creating this little water vortex around King Shark, and he's running so fast that he's sending electricity through the water, and it's kind of keeping King Shark in one place, and it's just zapping him all around. And then Barry ends it with one final thrown lightning bolt, which it was just amazingly epic. Hands down one of my favorite parts of the episodes. I mean, at least action wise. Other favorite parts has to be the whole Wally and Barry situation. Could we finally get that whole here's Wally and Barry, because Wally is currently working on a project, and he, it was kind of suggested that Barry help him, just because, Barry's pretty smart. So maybe he can toss some ideas around, and, but that doesn't really go too well, them getting along. I mean, granted, it wasn't really Barry's idea to begin with. It was more so Joe and Iris's, because they he's part of the family, and he, particularly Joe wants him and Barry to kind of get along. Because, I mean, prior to this, Wally and Barry haven't really had much interaction, so this is their first time. But like I said, it didn't go too well, because it's kind of almost out of jealousy, because Wally kept hearing from Iris and Joe just how perfect and amazing Barry is, how he could do no wrong. So to him, it always felt like, he has this new family, and he feels like he has to constantly compete just to be relevant amongst his own family. you know, and he even went as far as calling Barry a coward when King Shark showed up at the house and attacked. And he, like, Barry obviously dealt with the situation as the Flash, but obviously Wally doesn't know, so Wally just looked at Barry's like, oh yeah, he was just hiding, and he's a coward. So but Joe eventually sat down and talked to Wally. He was like, you have to understand, Wally. Like, Barry had his own situation. His mom was dead. His mom was murdered, and then his dad was falsely sent to prison for her murder. So they, they took him in as part of the family. And yes, they say all this stuff about him being perfect, but he's not perfect. It's just that they're proud of who he became, because even through all the crap that happened to Barry in his life, he's become the man he is now, and they're all so proud of him. But that doesn't mean that him as the father loves Barry more than he does even Iris, or loves Iris more than she does Barry or Wally. Like, to him, he loves them all equally. Barry is his son just as much as Wally is his son, and that was Jesse L. Martin doing his usual thing, just giving you that warm fuzzy feeling on the inside, want to make you come to tears. And that's not the only point that almost brought me to tears too. It was also the whole situation where Barry kind of confessed to Joe and Iris, like, about his situation in Earth 2, about how, like, how their lives were in Earth 2, like Iris being a cop and Joe being a singer. But also the fact is that Joe died, and that how how all that made him feel, because to him, he could have looked at Earth 2 as just like, oh, it's not a real place. But meeting their doppelgangers and, being in a world where his mom was still alive, it in his mind, it was like, no, this place is real. And it's just like, to him, failing to save Joe on that other side, on that other Earth, was the same thing as losing Joe, the Joe he's come to always know, in Earth 1. So it's like, it was the same thing to him. Plus, all that on top of this recent thing about Jay, and like I said earlier, Zoom leaving all of Earth 2 in, like, for Zoom to do whatever he wants to with it. And so that kind of, it just, it kind of broke Barry on the inside. Like, he'd been bottling it up this whole time, and it's just like, man, I get it, Barry. I just wish he didn't. You could argue, yes, granted, a lot of stuff that happened in Earth 2 was Barry's fault, because he got so sidetracked and so sucked into, like, oh, this is the life I kind of wanted. Granted, Joe doesn't like me, but still, I'm with the woman I was always in love with, and I got my mom in the same world. So it's like he became so distracted with that life that bad stuff happened. And yes, you could argue that, but I feel like, no, it's just like, he shouldn't take blame for something that, it's not 100% his fault. But he's like, you know what? It is my fault. And at the end of the episode, he's like, I'm going to take responsibility for it, because I am going to make this up to you guys. I'm going to set things right. I'm going to take responsibility for what I did. We, not just me, we are going to stop Zoom. And Wesley's like, oh, how are we going to do that? And he's like, I mean, honestly, I don't know. Breachers are closed. I don't know how we're going to do this, but we're going to soon enough. And then finally, the big reveal at the very end of the episode is we see Zoom carrying Jay's body, kind of tossing it down, and a man in a mask in a cage looking on. And then Zoom takes his mask off to reveal himself to be the one and only Jay Garrick. So, if you keep in count, at the very least, granted at most, there's at least 4 Jays. There's the Jay in the cage, which, yeah, we've all, like, figured it out. Okay, the person in that cage is definitely Jay Garrick as well, because last episode he was banging on the glass, and then, like, he did his little code, and they're like, Jay, you mean Jay Garrick? He's like, yeah, but Barry's like, but no, Jay Garrett's not here. But he was kind of shaking his head, just banging on the glass, like, no, you're not understanding. So the person in there, at least I believe, is Jay Garrett, not unless it's someone else, but that could possibly be Jay Garrett. There's a Jay Garrett on the floor, and then there's a Jay Garrett on the floor who's dead, and then there's a Jay Garrett who's Zoom. And then there's Earth 1's Jay Garrick, who goes by the name Hunter Zolomon. In case you didn't know, Hunter Zolomon is the name of Zoom in the comic books. I knew that at the time I did my video where I talked about my theories about Zoom's identity, but I just didn't include it just because I didn't want to spoil that for anyone. But at the point is this video, I mean, at the time, at this time it's been revealed that Zoom's real identity as Jay. Possibly, I don't know, because the only line he has is, well, this is complicated, which it is. So I'm curious to see like how this is all going to be revealed, like what this real situation is, if it's the real Jay, and all that stuff. I don't know. And then finally, I want to talk about Arrow, which starts off with Felicity trying to going through physical therapy, trying to ready herself for the device that Curtis created or was revealed last episode, where he had it's a device mainly to help Felicity possibly walk again. She's struggling with that a bit, but she's trying to keep hopeful about it. And then walks in Damien Dark, who decides to reveal to Oliver that I have William, and that basically Oliver has to resign his candidacy for mayor if he wants William back safely. And then Felicity is like, who is William? And then Oliver finally reveals the truth to her. And as to be expected, she didn't take it the way Oliver was probably hoping she'd take it. She was pretty pissed at him about it. And then it finally gets revealed to the entire group. And then it also gets revealed that not only, Felicity wasn't the only one who didn't know. John didn't know, and neither did Laurel. But Thea knew. Malcolm knows, and so does Barry. So Felicity's a little hurt. She's like, so I guess I was like the only one who didn't know. It's like, granted, every one of them knows for different circumstances. Thea found out because she was rummaging through some stuff. Malcolm just because he's him. Of course he'd know about that. And Barry knows about it because he went back in time. Like, he had gone to an alternate. He was living in a he basically went back in time after basically the whole thing with Vandal Savage went wrong and pretty much wiped out the city and killed a lot of people. So after he went back in time, he retained that knowledge, obviously. So, but William's mom, I think her name's Samantha, shows up and kind of is just pissed at Oliver because she's like, yo, my son got taken and it's your fault. I told you not to tell anybody. He's like, I didn't tell anybody. He's like, I'm going to do everything I can in my power to get her back. But then she's like, what can you do? So Oliver decides to ease her mind. He's going to tell her the truth about who he is. He tells her, invites her down to the base. And so that they decide that they're going to get her back, but they're going to need a little help. Which leads to one of my favorite lines. It's like, it's like, oh, what about Constantine? And Oliver's like, oh yeah, he's in hell. And they're like, oh, where is he? And Oliver's like, no, he's literally in hell right now. And they're like, okay. So Oliver decides to call up another hero named Vixen, who has pretty awesome powers. She has like a totem, which allows her to kind of call on, I guess you call the spirits of animals, and kind of adds their attributes to hers. Like, for instance, she could summon a gorilla or a to like give her superhuman strength type of situation, or a rhino, for instance, or she can summon the powers of a Hulk and kind of gain the ability to fly, which is pretty awesome. They attempted to go after Dark the first time, but it did not go well, and it ended with Dark kind of kicking their asses and getting away. And he ends up pushing out the timetable because he had actually given Oliver a little time before resigning, but he's like, you know what? Now you have less time to do it. So Oliver sadly resigns and actually has to say that he's giving his full support to Damien Dark's wife as he, exits from the candidacy, which is just kind of like another like sucker punch. Which, even if he doing this, Oliver and the group does realize that even doing this, there's no guarantee that Dark is going to keep his word and keep William alive. That he might just end up killing William just to spite Oliver. But they find out, because Vixen herself draws upon her powers from a talisman, maybe Damien Dark works the same way, that maybe he's drawing upon his powers from a specific talisman as well. And so when they get ready to attack him, in the process of the whole battle, Vixen smashes the totem, which messes with Damien's powers. And so Oliver ends up beating the crap out of him, which is like I said, I feel a little sad for Damien, because it's like he's always been this menacing, powerful figure, and then just to see him taken down so easily, it's like, oh man. But nevertheless, and a running theme throughout this episode is that Oliver's trying to figure out what he's going to do about this whole William situation. He has Diggle telling him it's okay to keep him close, that, you stay in his life and you just make sure that you protect him. But he also has Vixen telling him, like, don't keep him too close to your world, because he will get dragged into it and he might become a casualty of it. So Oliver has to spend time deciding what he's actually going to do now. And so at the end of the episode, he decides what he's going to do, and that's to keep William away. He sends William and Samantha away. He tells them not to tell anybody, including him, where they're going to go. So, but Oliver makes a video, which William isn't supposed to see until he's 18, basically telling William, like, I'm your dad, and I'm also the Green Arrow, and I had to keep out of your life for your safety. And Felicity overhears this, and she's been upset the entire time. Like, she pushed her feelings aside because she's like, we have to save William first, then we'll deal with our issues. And so now that everything's settled down, she decides, like, now I have to, like, sort myself out. She takes off the engagement ring because she's like, I understand why you did what you did, why you didn't tell me about it, and why you made this decision on your own. But that's the fact is, you made both these decisions on your own. You could have come to me. We're supposed to be, invested in each other. It's kind of like, that's part of marriage, being like telling each other everything. It's like, I get that you had your reasons for not telling me. I mean, she gave you an ultimatum, and I get that, but you still should have told me. I'm like, I was going to be your wife. And she's like, I need space. And before Oliver can really say anything, Felicity's legs starts twitching a little bit, and she gets up. And it's kind of a happy moment, but it's quickly, like, overshadowed by the fact that it's like, yeah, but that doesn't change how she feels and what's just been said, so she walks away. So I like I said, I feel bad for Oliver. Whether it was the right thing or wrong thing to tell Felicity, I don't know. Like, personally, I feel like he should have told her, like, but you can't 100% blame him for not telling her. I guess the mindset could be that if he had told Felicity and this situation happened after he told Felicity the truth, then maybe it ends up getting back to Samantha that, the person you told someone, didn't you? Oh, yeah, and you can't be like, oh, well, I didn't tell anybody. Yeah, I told my girlfriend / fiance, Felicity, and now my son's been taken, type of thing. So that could have, I know it's a stretch, but that could be like some kind of possibility that Oliver was thinking in his head. It's like, no, you should have trusted Felicity. Like, Diggle understood. He was like, I understand why you didn't tell me, but it's like, Felicity, it's like, out of anybody, he should have told Felicity. And, sadly for Oliver, it's just, trust isn't 100% something that's easy for him, just the way life's been for him for the past couple years. So it's not that easy to be 100% honest with people. I mean, he trusts in people, but it's just, for him, it's hard to tell people everything. And that's kind of why Felicity's mad, because he can't find it in himself to tell her everything. And another final thing I want to talk about is the fact of Malcolm. Thea had earlier in the episode confronted Malcolm about any possible kidnapping of William, and Malcolm outright said, like, no, I had no part in it. But we, as the audience, know that's a bold-faced lie because he definitely went to dark about it. But he told Thea, was like, no, there's no way I would do that. But at the end of the episode, we find out, yeah, it was him. Because it was actually him personally who kidnapped William. Because they're like, oh, the person who kidnapped William was a one-armed person. So it wasn't Dark, it was Malcolm himself. Thea confronts him and he gets pissed at her. He's like, how dare you come up here and treat me like this, you know? Like, I'm your father. You can say all these things that you want, but everything I do is because I love you. You have no idea how much I've protected you. Which makes you think like that Malcolm knows a lot more, obviously, than he's letting on. And it's like, what exactly did he mean by that? That he's protecting her. Like, what exactly is he protecting her from? Hive? I did like that line, though. I can live with you hating me rather than have you love me and be dead. I did like that, so. Still back to having Malcolm as a threat, which a lot of people were alluding to anyway, that this was going to go that route. So I'm very curious to see where this goes. But that's about it for this episode. iZombie, The Flash, as well as Arrow will be taking a break for a while. I mean, they won't be coming back until exactly a month from now. Flash and iZombie return on the 22nd of March, and Arrow returns on the 23rd. But that's about it. Until the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.